Welcome to Beyond the Matrix with Rod Bryant and Jerry Gordon, here on Israel News Talk Radio. Unplug, strap yourself in, because you are about to move beyond the Matrix.
Hello, this is Rod Bryant. You are listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio, along with my amazing co-host, Jerry. Wave hi to those people on YouTube that are watching us, and we really appreciate it. If you want to watch it and you're listening to it right now, you can go to NETIV online, one solid word, Nativ online, and you can find it under the channel that's called BTM, Beyond the Matrix. We have a great guest aligned for you today, same one we've had a couple of weeks ago and many weeks before, Mr. Stephen Bryen. Jerry, could you give us a little introduction?
Steve Bryen is a former Reagan era Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Technology and Security. He's a known military technologist, and he's a prolific columnist at the Asia Times. But today, he reveals some things we didn't know. Rocket motors exploded essentially in Beirut, meaning Iran is supplying the innards for that stuff. But most importantly, the test of the Arrow 2 missile last week proved the Israelis are on their game deterring Iran's nuclear threat. And that's an interesting development.
We also are going to find out, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the peace deal with the UAE and Israel. We're going to talk about the U.S. and Israeli cooperation for the Arrow system, the possibility of having an Americanized system that they can deploy on American deployments for their military. So, Jerry, like we said, Stephen Bryen is always a great host. I mean, a great guest, and full of amazing information, and we never want to miss that opportunity. Just a couple of admin notes. If you want to send us an email, send me an email, or Jerry, Rod or Jerry, at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you are subscribed to YouTube, make sure that you leave us a comment here and there on the show. We really appreciate your comments and input on the show. So if there's, Jerry, you have anything else you want to give before we go to the break?
We love your comments and keep them coming.
Yes, exactly. We really do appreciate it. Okay, guys, don't go away. We'll be right back after these lovely messages. I'm Rod Bryant. Thank you so much for joining us for the second segment. Jerry Gordon, our great producer. Also, we have Mr. Stephen Bryen, one of the greatest assets to Beyond the Matrix. We really appreciate you coming on the show today. I know that you're enjoying the relaxation out in the country by the bay or by the water, but hopefully we won't hold you too long. Jerry, did you want to go ahead and open up with the next segment of questions?
I do. Steve, last week there was a successful test of another layer of the Israeli rocket and missile umbrella. It's called the Arrow 2. How significant was that following last year's successful test of the Arrow 3 in Alaska?
Well, I think it's a very interesting development for lots of reasons. Arrow program goes back to the 1986 when it got started. And it's been evolving ever since. So there's Arrow, which is no longer. There's Arrow 2, which we just saw in a version of it. And then there's Arrow 3. The Arrow 3 is an exo-atmospheric strategic system designed to go out far against the target. Arrow 2 is the next layer down, if you want. And it's designed to go out against a tactical.
So it's considered a low altitude.
Well, it's not low altitude. It actually can get into the exo-atmosphere, but it doesn't have the range.
Okay.
In other words, it doesn't have the down range. But otherwise, it's quite similar. In fact, I think what's going on in this kind of way is they're merging together Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 in certain ways. So they give you the long range and then the next one in, and they're going to work systematically together. That's part of it. Part of the deal, and the reason this test took place and what it was, there were two reasons, actually. The first is this is a test against a nuclear-equipped Iranian missile. Okay, not a conventional missile. The demands on destroying a nuclear-equipped missile are quite different from destroying a conventional equipped.
Right.
The kill level has to be much higher. Okay, the destruction has to be much greater and much sooner. Those are just absolute requirements. So they've improved. This is called Block 5 of Arrow 2. That comes in different blocks, and this is the latest block, Block 5. And I would say it's Block 5 plus because I think they made some additional changes. The second thing is they have integrated it not only with the Green Pine radar, the Israeli surveillance radar that they use to key the Arrow missiles and others, but they also integrated it with the U.S. TPY-2 radar. That's the same radar that's used with THAAD, the Theater Ballistic Missile Defense System.
Right.
THAAD is deployed in Saudi, UAE, and I think the idea here is to get earlier warning for Israel and for the United States of a potential attack. The idea, look, the perfect missile, there's no perfect missile defense, but the best missile defense is to get them on launch.
Right.
As close to launch as you can before they get to deploy their warheads and become more difficult to track and destroy.
Right.
And the TPY-2 can also pick up fakes, decoys, and sort out what's real and what's not real. So it's a very interesting radar. And I think that's very important because it makes possible a really interesting layered defense. And they've been working on this for a number of years to integrate it, but I think this test demonstrated that it really worked great. And they were able to key everything together and make it function exactly 100%. So it's a big deal. It's a very big step. Arrow 3 is still going to be the strategic layer, but it's using the same radars and a lot of the same bits.
Your mic is off, Jerry. Could you turn it back on? There you go.
Steve, what about the Americanization of the Iron Dome system? We've seen from you and others lots of consternation about why it was delayed.
Well, it was delayed because the Army didn't want it. We have a thing in America called NIH. You know what that means? Not invented here.
Right. And explain to him why the U.S. Army did not want it. It had nothing to do with function and form.
Well, they say it did, but you have to take that with some grains of salt. I mean, they made some arguments that they wouldn't give them the source code, but they didn't need it yet. And anyway, they didn't ask for it. They just said you wouldn't give it. And then they said, well, it didn't work against cruise missiles. Well, it's true. It's never been tested against cruise missiles because no one fires cruise missiles yet at Israel. They will in the future, but not yet. So those were the complaints, so-called. By the same token, we had guys sitting in Iraq, like at Al-Assad, unprotected. And, we should have been getting Iron Dome out there because it works. I mean, it's proven, it's had over 2,000 successful kills against Hamas, mostly Hamas missiles of different types, including the Grad. So it has done a tremendous job. It's been very effective. And it has another feature I really like, and that is that it's able to distinguish between what's going to hit you and what's not going to hit you. And what's not going to hit you, what's not important, they just let it crash. They don't care. They want to deal with anything that's strategically important, significant. Right.
The nice thing, it's an automated system where it doesn't require someone to have to go do any deep analysis, correct?
Deep analysis is in the algorithms that the system executes. Yeah.
So when we saw video of the attack that the Iranian missiles were fired at the base in Iraq. Yeah, I saw it.
Yeah.
Did you get to see that video, Stephen?
No, I only saw the aftermath. What was left?
Okay. Well, the video, it's very clear. It's on YouTube, but you can actually see it starts with an invisible thing you don't see, but all of a sudden the Gatling guns are going off and they're spraying it. But the closer these things got, they were exploding overhead. I mean, where the person was watching the video, these things were being hit outside of the perimeter, but the projectile of debris continued to fly into the facility. That's why there was so much damage. Say again, sir?
Are you sure they really even hit any?
No, it was very clear that they hit quite a few. But the point is when they would hit them, you would see them split apart into pieces and just debris fall all over the place.
Kinetic energy and exploding.
And this is what you were talking about, why that system is woefully inadequate. And they've, of course, learned that after the fact. But
well, they've known it for a long time. And look, we have the same system on our ships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's called CIWS, CIWS, Close-In Weapon Support. It's crap because you're 1,000 yards away when you're trying to kill an incoming missile, and even if you hit it, the kinetic energy is such that it's going to hit you.
Absolutely, you're going to be getting a debris blast.
Right. So I mean, it's a last resort of a last resort. It's not something you really want. You want to get them. Look, the secret, as I said, the secret of missile defense is to get the incoming missile at launch or as soon as you can after launch, before it gets on top of you.
Exactly. So you're saying that this Arrow 3 is going to be sort of a hybrid system that we've put together as well as Israeli technology, or is it going to be?
What I'm saying is, Arrow, if you want to Arrow 2, and probably Arrow 3, is we are sharing radars with the United States. Israel is sharing radars with the United States. It's just a very interesting development because I don't think it's been done before by the United States, for sure.
Wow, I didn't know that.
You're talking about potential nuclear, because this is designed against a nuclear threat. The new Arrow 2 Block 5 is concerned about a nuclear threat. And once the Iranians have nuclear warheads, which can't be that far in the future, despite what Mr. Biden says, they're going to threaten not only Israel but Saudi and UAE and everybody else.
But this Arrow 3 system is going to depend on a much larger strategic, monitoring from radar, satellites, et cetera, correct? Yeah. So this is not going to be like a simple Thiad system set up and you detect that from Iran, from Israel.
No, but I think what you can do is if you have coverage of Iran from, let's say, UAE.
Got you.
Places like that, Saudi, so on. Coverage of Yemen, too, which I would worry a lot about Yemen because the Iranians have free reign there.
Right.
And maybe coverage of Syria, too, because, who knows what they're going to try to bring in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they have let's come back to Beirut for a second, because I think one of the things that has escaped notice is that it's fairly certain that what the Hezbollah guys were doing was taking Frog missiles, Zelzal 2s to be precise, which are not very accurate, and trying to modify them with GPS and with steering capabilities so that they could be precision targeted against Israel. Haifa, for example, the threat against the Haifa port by Hezbollah. Problem was they couldn't hit anything accurately. But with this Zelzal modified, they are hoping to be able to do it. That's what the threat was all about. These are the kinds of things that you want Arrow 2 and other
Right.
systems to take out. By the way, Zelsa is a pretty good sized missile.
Oh, absolutely. So, look, we're going to come back after the break. I want to pick up and talk about pretty interesting stuff about the peace agreement between the UAE and Israel. Guys, don't go away. We'll be right back after these important messages. Okay, guys, stand by.
Can I sit by?
Yes, sit by. Or you can actually nap if it's possible.
Could we start by asking my question about balloons, kites, and lasers?
Okay.
Okay.
So we're going to call it balloons, kites, and lasers. Oh, boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, my. Maybe that's it.
Oh, my, oh, my.
Well, it's worse than lions and tigers and bears.
Talk Radio.
I'm Rod Bryant. Thank you so much. It's funny.
How's Dorothy?
Dorothy.
So are you going to have family there?
Where I am, you mean?
Yeah, where you are in Virginia. You're going to invite down your extended family?
Shaughnessy's here. That's all. No.
Just you two?
Why would he want to break up the peace to do that? I'd be chunking grandchildren in the marsh about 30 minutes after they're there.
I want to chase children. I can do it at home.
That's right. That's right. Stand by.
And I'll pop the question.
Okay, making the adjustments. In the queue. In 3, 2, and 1.
Welcome back to Beyond the Matrix, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
I'm Rod Bryant. We are in the third and final leg of Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Thank you guys for watching on YouTube. By the way, you can subscribe and hit the alert button so every time we post a new show up, you'll see it. Also, add your commentary. We really appreciate your feedback. As a matter of fact, last week, you guys have given us some good feedback. We were talking about Beirut, and we've kind of brought that up in today's show. We really appreciate it. We also have Stephen Bryen, our wonderful guest. So where were we at in the melee of discussion? But Gary, do you want to ask the question? You want me to?
I'll pop it to him.
Go for it.
Back in late June, we interviewed two young ladies from our area here in Greater Pensacola who are now in Israel. One of them is located at a kibbutz less than 3 kilometers from Gaza. So what's with these balloons, kites, and lasers doing to remove that threat?
Well, the balloons and kites are pretty dangerous. They're used to set fires, and they're used to carry munitions. Same with the kites. They're short range, relatively speaking. They follow the wind to some degree. But if they're launched correctly, they cause a lot of damage. A lot of farms, forests have been destroyed, homes have been burned, and people have been injured because in some of them they put RPG warheads on them and float them in and hope some kid will. They put some child's homework assignment on it or some invitation. The kid opens it up and blows them up. It's a terrible thing. It's ugly. It's a war against infrastructure, actually. And against people. It's not against military. It has no military capability, whatever. This is a war against people and infrastructure. The Israelis have been hard-pressed to figure out how to deal with it other than the retaliation, which they're doing right now, I think, as we speak. But one small company is called Opti Defense. It was founded by 3 guys from Ben Gurion University in the Negev. Have come up with a laser killer, if you want to call it that can shoot down the balloons and the kites and even get rid of the little Chinese UAVs that are all over the place these days. Well, they're also using those as well. and it can do it. Doesn't care whether they're tied to a string. It doesn't care whether they're commanded or not commanded. It just sees them and shoots them down with a laser. And the laser it doesn't burn the eyes, but it burns these things up. It's kind of neat. The system's called Lahavor, which means light blade in Hebrew, or in English rather, for the Hebrew words, Lahavor. And it's now being tested. I don't know if it's fully deployed yet, but the first unit's supposed to be in the field now. Is that a solution? It might be for a while if they have enough of them. They've got to make them, though. They only have one, and you need a lot more than one. So I hope they succeed. I was very impressed with, first of all, the fact that some civilians came up with this idea and built this thing, found some money to do it with. The company has a net income of, I'm sure even net, an actual revenue of $500,000. That's
Wow.
the whole thing.
That's an amazing success story. But let me ask you, is this a completely automated system that can be set and monitored and sort of some level forgotten?
No. This is not an automated system. This is a system where you see the image, you put the cursor on the incoming.
Probably using a task camera of some kind?
Yeah, it's using a thermal camera that's supplied by LD.
So if people don't know, it's a camera that could often be put on a fighter aircraft, but it's thermal. And so they can spot it from a long distance, and they can also key a target with that, correct?
That's right. That's exactly how it works. Yeah, but it's not automated. You can't claim that for that. Could in the future possibly be automated, but right now it's not.
That is a very brilliant thing.
But it's a very cheap system. I mean, my Hebrew's pretty awful. I was listening to the explanation from the border patrol people who were explaining their support of this project. And they're saying, well, it's probably maybe going to cost $1 million. I think it'll cost less. That's very cheap for the defense system.
Look, $1 million? That's usually just wasted money on a piece of equipment now.
Well, the Pentagon doesn't even count that way. They start, higher numbers.
Right, exactly.
That's more like it. You know the famous Everett Dirksen line, $100 million here, $100 million there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Like real money, exactly. Jerry, go ahead.
So Israel has entered into a rather dramatic normalization agreement. It's called the Abraham Accords with the UAE. And yet, not long ago, Israel was engaged in operations targeting a Hamas weapons dealer there. So was this deal sort of payback for that episode?
No, I don't think it was payback. I think the Israelis worked very hard to fix the mistake. Let's call it a mistake. I don't think it was a mistake. But anyway, the mistake that they made by doing it in the UAE. Let's put it that way. And so they have been working with the UAE for some time. By the way, across the board, there's been a very strong relationship with the UAE. It's developed very quickly, but very well, as it has with some others. Maybe Saudi could be mentioned in the equation. So, I mean, what's really going on here is that the geopolitics of the region have changed. And changed in a very dramatic way. It started back in 1977 when Anwar Sadat said, enough of this war stuff. This is ruining our country. It's ruining everybody. No one wins. Let's do something about it. And I think that it had a long pause. But with the rise of Iran, the equation has changed yet again. And everybody in the Gulf is really worried about the Iranians, and so is Israel. So they have a common agenda, and then I think they're also discovering that they can get along. So it's pretty neat. And they have differences. There's a huge difference over the Palestinian question. That's not going to go away. They probably have some other differences too. But I mean, I think the bottom line is that these are countries that ought to be cooperating, and they are cooperating. And this peace agreement, I think, is People are speculating this is the first of many, and even Netanyahu saying there's going to be more. And I think there will be, in one form or another. There has to be, because that's the only way. The regional cooperation is the only way these guys are going to all survive. By the way, I wish we would get that message through in Asia, because there we have Korea that doesn't like the Japanese, who don't like anybody. And then we have the Taiwanese who are excluded because they have some disease, smell bad or something. When in fact, all these guys ought to be cooperating, and the United States should be cooperating too, because China is becoming a major geopolitical threat, and you need to checkmate that. If you want peace, you have to be strong. You have to show that you're united. You have to have the organization behind it and the military capability. Those are things which are absolutely essential.
Stephen, I was wondering if the true carrot should be prosperity in exchange for peace. Because in reality, that's what's going to happen to the nations that do come together with tight compacts and peace agreements so that we can have joint prosperity. I mean, because isn't that where it's really at? And why do you think the UAE would be approaching Israel at this level?
Well, I don't think it's that. UAE has oil. It has more money than it knows what to do with. It has some internal issues, serious internal issues. But I think the biggest overall threat is the threat across the water. And they're all worried about it.
Iran is pushing this, is the nexus for the UAE's response.
It didn't hurt to have Iran doing that. I mean, could it have happened without the Iranian threat? Maybe. But the urgency wouldn't be there. I think the urgency is there. I mean, look, we know the Saudis are talking to the Israelis every day. They're looking to get help on defending against cruise missiles, defending against rockets, it goes on and on, defending against terrorism. All these things are things they are very concerned with. These are moderate states with moderate politics. They're not democracies, but they're moderate, and they're friendly to the United States, and they're friendly, to Western ideals. So it's very important to help them out. Let's call it that, and they have to help themselves out. So this is one way they're doing it.
What do you think
I think it's great.
Mossad's role in making this happen? Because we've
well, there's been a lot of talk about, Mossad gave him technology after the debacle in the UAE when they went after the Hamas guy. I don't know. I'll leave that. That's really speculation. I just don't know. I think there was more. It wasn't. Israel wouldn't have helped them out if it wasn't in Israel's interest to help them out.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So it really doesn't matter whether they did it because they made a mess of some operation or because it was in Israel's interest. Israel's interest, I think, was the thing that was most important in that, and that didn't necessarily lead to a peace agreement, and it didn't hurt. So I think that's how I would look at it.
Steve, there's another bad actor who's causing a real problem in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that's Erdogan. You've got.
We have 45 seconds, Jerry. Go ahead.
What do you think Israel's protection is there of its gas fields?
Well, it's a NATO problem and an American problem, much more than an Israeli problem. And the United States is very anxious for Turkey to get in line and to behave itself. Even the EU is complaining to the Turks right now, want them to behave themselves. Will they? I don't think so.
God willing, we're going to see some temper. Some tampering of temper with the Turks. But Jerry, Stephen, we've got to go. We're out of time. It's been great having a conversation with you. Enjoy your relaxed little holiday. And you've been listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio. Shalom until next week at this time. Awesome.
Okay, Steve. Thanks for a relaxed and important
Yes.
discussion.
Can I take off my clothes?
No. I was assuming you didn't have any clothes on except for that shirt. So
Shauna was doing one interview with the guy in Israel who was there with a nice shirt and a jacket and great. And he got up and he had shorts and sandals.
That's what I'm talking about there. Okay, thank you so much, Stephen. Have a wonderful time. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello, this is Rod Bryant. You are listening to Beyond the Matrix here on Israel News Talk Radio, along with my amazing co-host, Jerry Wave. Hi to those people on YouTube that are watching us, and we really appreciate it. If you want to watch it and you're listening to it right now, you can go to NETIV online, one solid word, Nativ online, and you can find it under the channel that's called BTM, Beyond the Matrix. We have a great guest aligned for you today, same one we've had a couple of weeks ago and many weeks before, Mr. Stephen Bryen. Jerry, could you give us a little introduction?
Steve Bryen is a former Reagan era Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Technology and Security. He's a known military technologist, and he's a prolific columnist at the Asia Times. But today, he reveals some things we didn't know. The rocket motors exploded essentially in Beirut, meaning Iran is supplying the innards for that stuff. But most importantly, the test of the Arrow 2 missile last week proved the Israelis are on their game deterring Iran's nuclear threat. And that's an interesting development.
We also are going to find out, and we're going to discuss a little bit about the peace deal with the UAE and Israel. We're going to talk about the U.S. and Israeli cooperation for the Arrow system, the possibility of having an Americanized system that they can deploy on American deployments for their military. So, Jerry, like we said, Stephen Bryen is always a great host. I mean, a great guest, and full of amazing information, and we never want to miss that opportunity. Just a couple of admin notes. If you want to send us an email, send me an email, or Jerry, Rod or Jerry, at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you are subscribed to YouTube, make sure that you leave us a comment here and there on the show. We really appreciate your comments and input on the show. So if there's, Jerry, you have anything else you want to give before we go to the break?
We love your comments and keep them coming.
Yes, exactly. We really do appreciate it. Okay, guys, don't go away. We'll be right back after these lovely messages.